What if I told you there's a JLC that has more in common with Richard Mille than a Patek or an IWC? Hi everyone and welcome to Shaluso, and today we are talking about possibly one of the most unique JLCs in their entire long storied history. And that is of course the Amvox II chronograph. Now, starting with a bit of history, of course, for some context with my Richard Mille comparison, Richard Mille was founded in 2001. 2 years later though, JLC revived a partnership with Aston Martin. 2003 was when they resuscitated this partnership. 2005 they released the first Amvox, Amvox being a combination of the initials for Aston Martin, AM, and of course JLC's famous Memovox alarm, which is probably their most popular watch aside from the reversal. The first iteration of this was of course an alarm watch. The dial was styled to look like the gauges of a car, so you were missing actually most of the bottom indices of the dial so as to make it look much more like a rev counter, for example, and it housed an alarm. Pretty standard stuff, an automotive themed watch. A few little gimmicks here and there. But where things get interesting are in the 2006 Amvox II. The design was properly like nothing we've seen from JLC. It was modern, it was open worked, and it's just oozing in details. Pretty much everywhere you look, there's something new and unique and different, something that's the complete opposite of what we currently see in JLC, and honestly, pretty contrary to what we've seen historically from them even. You had things like sapphire subdials, which were completely see-through. There was like a mesh pattern throughout most of the upper half of it. The Aston Martin co-branding was actually quite subtle. It was just the running seconds which rotated around that had the wings, and even those, you could only see them half of the time because the small seconds was usually covered. Also around the bottom edge between about 4 o'clock up to about 7, it was open work so you could see other parts of the movement as well. It wasn't fully skeletonized, but you could just see these little touches and indicators of the movement to show you that there's something special going on. And obviously JLC, the watchmaker's watchmaker, there was something very special going on. And then one last detail on this 200-piece limited edition was a little sliding lock on the side of the case that definitely revealed that this was something special. And speaking of special things, that brings us actually to today's sponsor, which is Chronext. Chronext has a huge range of watches, both new and pre-owned, but an especially good selection of genuinely special pieces, like this Amvox II, a limited edition of only 200 pieces, and they have one of these in stock. And that's not the limit of cool and unique watches, special editions that they keep in their inventory. So make sure you check out their website, and their links in the description below, as well as using the discount code SHALUSO so you can get a discount when you find something you like. But let's stop beating around the bush and talk about what is actually so special about this watch, and that is of course the movement. No surprise, I mean, a good looking watch anyone can make, but this is JLC. In 2006, when they introduced the Amvox II, they introduced a brand new way of interacting with a chronograph. It was a vertically triggered chronograph. You'll notice on the sides of the case, there aren't any pushers. It's just the regular crown which you can use for setting the time and date. Instead, this is triggered by pressing the glass. That slider on the side of the case is a lock for the chronograph. So you can lock the entire chronograph, you can lock just the reset so that you don't damage the watch by forcing a reset, or you can have all of it unlocked so you can start, stop, and reset without any issues. And that is something that is completely unique, and to this day hasn't really been replicated by any other watch brands to my knowledge. The logic behind this is that it makes it much easier to operate the chronograph if, for example, you're wearing gloves, or racing gloves for that matter, so that it's much easier to operate. You simply press on the top of the sapphire and a rocker connects to the Calibre 751E and engages in the chronograph. And that enables the vertical clutch column wheel chronograph to start, stop, and reset just like you would a normal one, however, much easier in principle than what you would have to do if you had to use pushers or if you had to reach over the watch. You can imagine when you're driving, the idea being it's just a touch of the button. And the great thing is that in addition to having this innovation, at its core, this was still a very good movement in itself. It's a 65-hour power reserve coming from 2 barrels, as I mentioned before, a vertical clutch and column wheel. So it's also sophisticated before you include the innovation. And of course, like most JLCs at the time up until now, it passed through the Master 1000 Hours test to ensure that the movement, as well as the case-up watch, meets everything it promises in terms of quality, durability, water resistance, even reliability in different temperatures. If you want to know more about that, I have a separate video about what the 1000 hours entails. But this innovation, the vertical trigger, not only ties to JLC's history as being an innovator within the watch space, but also because it was done on an Aston Martin co-branded watch. We need to remember that Aston Martin is also closely associated with James Bond. And honestly, what is more James Bond and gadgety than a chronograph that you don't even have pushes for? You just touch the top and it starts and stops. This was probably the inspiration for what eventually came around with the Amvox transponder watch, which could actually unlock and lock your car, as long as it was an Aston Martin, by touching the sapphire as well. So definitely something really, really unique. And I think that is probably the biggest positive about this. If you want a watch that is completely unlike any other chronograph that you'll ever come across, this is the one. Leave your Daytonas at home, leave your flybacks, leave your split seconds. There's nothing like this, and the engineering alone, I think, is enough to be a reason to buy this watch. However, one of the other big positives in my view is just the attention to detail. As I mentioned before, every single surface on this watch has something cool or interesting about it. Whether it's the crown, whether it's the slider, whether it's any part of the dial. You can just look at this, forget reading the time. You're just gonna be lost in all of the details. And then the last positive, I think, is that subtle co-branding. I always appreciate co-branding, especially with cars, that focus more on an idea instead of just plastering the brand all over the place. And this really epitomizes, in my view, what Aston Martin was going for at that time, because they were trying to be more modern, more forward-thinking. It epitomizes, again, that connection of Aston Martin to James Bond, which I don't think was the intention, but definitely something really cool. Honestly, there's only 2 sets of wings on this watch, and that is that tiny little small seconds, which you don't see half of the time, and then on the back, of course. So I think it's very well executed as a concept, and I think that's one of the best things when it comes to co-branded watches with cars, because this is a watch you can get in perfectly good conscience without owning an Aston Martin. However, despite the fact that this watch has so much going for it, of course there are a few negatives. The first one I need to point out is that if you're used to a regular chronograph, this will take some getting used to and can sometimes feel even a little bit clunky, depending on the shape of your wrist. In my case, I have a pretty strong protrusion of a bone in my wrist. That means that the watch kind of sits on a bit of an angle. It's not really conducive to it. I think for this watch to work well for you, you need a pretty flat wrist so that there's a flat surface for you to press the watch against so you can properly engage and reset the chronograph. Also, because of that, it means it's a fingerprint magnet, because let's face it, you're not doing this with gloves, you're doing it with your fingers. So much like me when I was filming this video, you'll always be having to wipe off fingerprints. The second thing is that this is objectively a big watch. It's 44 millimeters in diameter, 16 millimeters thick. It does hide its size well, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, if your wrist is too small for this, you will notice. And then the last thing is that while I think as a feat of engineering, it's amazing, as a feat of design, I think it's really cool, as a chronograph, as a watch, reading it, it's impossible. There's so much going on this dial, there's so much just to distract you. So that's something to bear in mind as well if you plan on actually using this. If it's an art piece or something you want to celebrate the engineering, forget about that, you'll love it. And honestly, I love it just for that. But of course, this does come at a price. Now, I should mention there's a titanium version of this as well, so you don't necessarily have to get it in precious metal. But this one in precious metal goes for anywhere from $17,500 US up to about $21,000 US. For a bit of context, a steel Daytona will go for 2-3 times that. A steel Polaris at retail is only about $5,000 short of that. So when you bear that in mind, this represents actually really good value when you consider this is a watch that has all of the interest, all of the character, all of the bombast of something like a Richard Mille, which will cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions, but much more engineering, much more pedigree when it comes to the engineering coming from JLC. And honestly, it has a party trick that no other watch will ever be able to replicate. It's something that is truly unique, and being limited to only 200 pieces makes it that much more special when we're talking about the rose gold version. But in any case, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of the Amvox II? How do you think it compares to what JLC is currently making? Is this a direction that you would want them to keep going in? Would you want to see more crazy innovations like this from JLC, or do you prefer the more classical route that they've been taking for the last few years? I'd love to know you guys' thoughts in the comments below. And of course, if you like this video, make sure you like it and share it. If you want to see more pictures and infographics of watches as seen throughout this and all my other videos, then make sure you follow me on Instagram at Shaluso. If you want to see more videos of watches, then make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell as well so you know when the next video comes out. In any case, thanks for watching this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.